Chapter 6. Saturday mornings had always been special for Efren. It was a day he could sleep in just a tiny bit longer. A day he could expect a steaming bowl of arroz con leche and a freshly baked bolillo loaf waiting for him when he awoke. Then he could go into his study, which doubled as the bathtub, hurry through any homework he had, and stay until he finished a whole book or until Max or Mia needed to go potty, whichever came first. However, this entire weekend went differently. With Papa working overtime, every single moment was spent making sure Max and Mia stayed busy enough that they wouldn't have time to miss Ama. It was something that required a lot from Efren. A lot of horsey rides around the apartment, a lot of time pushing the twins back and forth on the school swing sets, a lot of coloring, a lot of time hiding and seeking, a lot of everything. So when Monday morning finally came around, Efren didn't complain. In fact, he looked forward to the rest. Unfortunately, Monday morning didn't exactly work out that way. Max was having a rough time, making the simple job of getting him dressed much more difficult. "Come on, Max, you don't want to go to school in your underwear, do you?" Max crawled out from under his blankets, causing a sigh of relief from his big brother. "Okay, better." Efren held up the pair of pint-sized pants for him to step into. Only Max's plans were different. He threaded his pudgy arms through the pant legs until his hands peeked out from the other side. "No seas payaso, please put them on right now." Max pulled his arm out only to stick his head in their place. Efren took a deep breath and massaged the sides of his forehead. He glanced over at the empty mattress beside him, trying to figure out what Ama would do. Efren looked straight into Max's penny-like eyes. "How about this? If you get dressed, I promise to give you a horsey ride all the way to school." Max shook his head no. "How about," a crooked grin sprouted on Efren's face, "I let you wear your Superman pajamas to school?" Max nodded. It wouldn't be the first time Max went to school in pajamas. Miss Solomon would understand. Mia tugged at Efren's shirt. "What about me? Can I go in pajamas too?" Efren bent down to look at her. "Sure, why not?" Having Max and Mia show up to school in PJs was the least of his worries. 4 days without Ama, and already Efren's world was starting to fall apart. By the time he reached school, the late bell had already rung. He hoped to see someone else, even a teacher, walking in late as well, but the campus hallways were empty. Even David had apparently made it to class on time. The second Efren entered the school, Mr. Garrett turned. His bushy eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "Mr. Nava, you're late." Efren lowered his head and signed the tardy clipboard nailed to the wall. He'd seen Mr. Garrett belittle everyone who'd ever tried justifying being late. "Excuses," Mr. Garrett would say, "are like armpits. We all have them and they stink." So under the section of the form labeled reason, Efren decided he was better off scribbling in the word unexcused. It felt like the whole class sat up paying sharp attention when Mr. Garrett approached the center of the room. "Mr. Nava, this makes 2 infractions in a row. Is there something I should know?" Efren tried lifting his head and making eye contact like Ama had taught him to do with grown-ups, but the best he could do was shake his head. Besides, Efren thought, it won't make a difference. "Well then, Mr. Nava, why don't you take a seat? And don't forget, the second infraction now means you have detention after school." After school? There was no way. There was nobody else to pick up Max or Mia. Doña Chana had been scheduled to return to Guatemala that morning, some emergency with her parents. Efren stood frozen by the tardy clipboard, wondering how much, if any, of the truth he should tell Mr. Garrett. After all, he was a teacher, and according to Apa, teachers could never know about the family's legal status. Efren remembered Apa telling him about the time the state voters passed a law that would have forced all teachers, even nice ones like Miss Solomon, to report any undocumented kids to the authorities. Apa, of course, held a grudge, saying that even though the courts erased the law, the masses had spoken and revealed exactly how they felt. So even though Efren was a U.S. citizen, his parents were not, and he could not say a word about that. "Mr. Nava, is something wrong? Did you misplace your seat?" "No, sir, I was just... Never mind." And just like that, Mr. Garrett launched into a drawn-out explanation of how direct quotes were going to empower everyone's essay arguments. Later, as the next bell rang, he reminded the class that paraphrasing would be coming next. But Efren barely listened. It wasn't like him to disobey a teacher, but what could he do? He couldn't stay after school, and he couldn't tell the truth. Efren missed the old days back when his neighborhood block made up his entire world, back when all he worried about was whether to play it safe with a game of marbles or brave a match of chicken fights along the monkey bars. It was all he thought about most of the day. In 7th period, Mrs. Flores, the science teacher, had the entire class performing virtual dissections on worms. Efren rushed through the lesson on account of Max and Mia, and when school finally let out, it was him leading the stream of kids off campus. More and more of them broke off into different neighborhoods with each block they passed. Those who veered off first lived in the fancy Floral Park block. Those who were slightly less well off disappeared into Washington Street and Square and so forth. So forth was where Efren headed. right into Highland Street, where apartment buildings and fruit trees made up most of the neighborhood. Reaching his block, he cut into the elementary school's parking lot. There in the middle of the kindergarten courtyard stood Miss Solomon, blowing her whistle at cars blocking the entrance. "Efren," she called him over. He walked into a big hug. "Hi, Miss Solomon. Have you seen Max and Mia?" "Over by the benches. I had a bit of trouble with them today." "Where is your... Oh my goodness, did your mom get at the job?" Efren crinkled his face. "Job?" Miss Solomon held up her hand at a car. "Yes, the other day she told me she was going to Irvine for a job interview at a new company that makes high-end women's clothing. Said it was for a supervisor's position." Efren's mind raced. That must have been where Amma got picked up. As much as it bothered him to lie to Miss Solomon, he didn't have a choice. "Yes, she started today. Says her boss is nice and that the pay is really good." Miss Solomon paused, making Efren nervous. He couldn't help but wonder if she might be reading his face. After all, she'd known him since he was in her kindergarten class. "Well, tell her I am glad. Oh, and about Max and Mia, they seem a bit emotional, especially Max." Efren's mind went into a panic. Fearful of saying the wrong thing, he simply shrugged instead. "Well, maybe it was just an off day," she said, waving another car through. "And be sure to thank your mom for her mole recipe. Tell her that the dinner was a real success thanks to her." "Sure thing, Miss Solomon." With that, he walked over to the play area and took a seat on a bench, watching Max push Mia on a swing before leaping onto her lap. Mia didn't seem to mind one bit. Sometimes insufferable, always inseparable, like Miss Solomon would joke. Efren couldn't imagine telling them about what had happened to Amma, but how long could he keep the truth from them? He looked over at the clock hanging over the bathrooms. 3 o'clock. He'd have to start thinking about what to feed them. He headed over to join Max and Mia. Just as he started pushing them back and forth on the swings, a thought crossed his mind. If Amma isn't able to come back home, does that mean we might have to go to her? Will we be forced to leave too? Efren felt a tug at his side. "I'm hungry." It was Max, right on schedule. "Yeah, me too," called out Mia. All the running around made the twins hungry. Now more than ever, Efren needed to stretch his money. Every dollar saved meant a step closer to getting Amma back. Fortunately, Don Topatillo's food truck was a real bargain, but he'd have to be careful. Not everything there was cheap. He thought about the menu, crunching numbers in his head. Carne asada tacos were definitely the best bargain. They were small but came with double tortillas. Efren could take half the meat and turn each taco into 2, a milagro of his own. "Max y Mia, how about some tacos?" Max shrugged. He was easy. Ate just about anything placed in front of him. It was Mia who Efren needed to worry about. "So, Mia, tacos okay?" "No, I want some of Amma's frijolitos with queso." This very mention of their mother set Max off. "When is Amma coming back?" "Soon," answered Efren. "Soon." "You're a mentiroso," Mia said, digging her finger into Efren's belly. "You said she'd be back yesterday. You lied." Mia was right. He had lied. Worse, he would have to look at the twins in the eye and do it again. The truth is that her sister, Tia Martha, got sick. Amma is with her, making sure she gets better. Mia rested her hands on her hips and squinted up at Efren. "How do we know it's not a lie?" Efren held out his pinky finger. Mia smiled and hooked her finger around his. "What about me?" Max asked, holding up a chubby finger of his own. Efren offered his other pinky. "I swear, Amma will be back soon." With that, Efren stopped by Don Tapatillo's food truck and fed the twins and himself. Using only $6, he turned 3 carne asada tacos into 6, and still managed to provide Mia the side of beans and cheese she wanted. If only he could find a way of getting Amma back home.